A spiritual revolution that has led to human beings now being considered a new species, in a globalized world where the common language spoken is more close to the Swedish than English. Paul Dienach's utopian portrait Chronicles from the Future finds itself in the same mind-blowing and fascinating depiction of a possible future such as George Orwell's 1984 and Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. The year is 3906, and the world has long since recovered from a terrible war taken place in the early 21st century. A mix of spiritual priests and scientists directs the development of the global society, where the global common language spoken is a combination of the Scandinavian languages Swedish, Norwegian, Danish, and English. Thanks to advanced mystic teachings and learnings, man has made enormous spiritual breakthroughs, to such an extent that human beings can now be considered a new species, called the Homo Occidentalis Novus. In Chronicles from the Future, we get to follow along in an exciting story where the book itself is an odd story indeed. The manuscript refers to the Swiss-Austrian professor Paul Amadeus Dienach, who is said to have lived in the beginning of the 20th century, and due to health problems, ended up in a coma for a whole year, between 1921 and 1922. During his time in deep coma, he claims to have time traveled with his consciousness into the future and into another man's body. The book is said to consist merely of his diary notes that he later wrote down when he woke up from the coma, of the year in the future as far as he could remember them upon his return. Regardless of whether you see this as a fictional setting, or take the author for his word, it is clearly an exciting depiction of the future. According to the story, during his year in coma, Dienach's consciousness is transferred to a body belonging to a person named Andreas Northam, somewhere in Europe around the year 3906. Dienach tells how both he and the medical staff in the future do not understand what happened to Northam until finally, after consulting psychologists, historians, and researchers who conclude that Dienach is who he claims to be, not Andreas Northam, but a person who, for some inexplicable reason, brought his consciousness to the future from the beginning of the 20th century. As the story progresses, Dienach finds out what has happened since the 20th century. Among other things, man has now been given a new species name, Homo Occidentalis Novus, after a spiritual breakthrough that fundamentally changed the human consciousness. The language of the future that is spoken is a mixture of the Nordic languages and English. Many words that the citizens use are Swedish sounding, and two of the cities that are often mentioned are, among others, New Gothenburg and New Uppsala. The countries of the world are no longer ruled by politicians, but by a group of priests and scientists, on a global level. When Dienach wakes up from his year in coma, he spends most of his days trying to recreate his diary from the future. In an attempt to save his deteriorating health, he moves from Switzerland to Greece, but soon faces death. There, he entrusts his fantastic story to his Greek student, George Papahatsis. After 40 years of work translating the notes from French to Greek, Papahatsis is said to have then reprinted the book in only a few copies, which ended up in the hands of a closed Masonic circle, until 1972. The group decided that the book should not be released to the public, as the contents were considered very controversial, and it was believed that the masses would not take on the information in the way needed. Papahatsis, who himself is said to have been part of this circle, however did not agree and is said to have tried in vain to get the book published, but Paul Amadeus Dienach's text thus fell into oblivion for almost 30 years, until it was finally translated into English. As the original manuscript is said to have been kept hidden in Masonic circles for most of its existence, it is speculated that parts of the original texts may have been removed, rewritten, or in other ways influenced by Masonic ideology. It is also unclear whether Dienach is actually a real person or merely part of a fictional framework, and rumors surround the origin of the original manuscript. What the actual truth and storyline is of course impossible to know for the outside observer, but regardless of the degree of fiction in its background story, Chronicles from the Future is a very interesting book that gives the reader many new thoughts about what the future might look like.